Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about potential, not expansion, but replacement, more teams potentially moving out of the CDL and a few new faces coming in. We also just finished up the final week of the Major 3 qualifiers in the Call of Duty League. So we now know what the Major 3 bracket looks like, who is in the winner's bracket, and who is unfortunately in the loser's bracket. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Doing all right. First and foremost, happy Easter to anybody and everybody celebrating. Also, I guess on a less serious note, happy 420 to anybody celebrating that occasion as well. But yeah, today was pretty. I guess all weekend was an interesting weekend of matches, just like we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks now. The final week of Major 3 qualifiers, because there's only 5 matches per team and 3 weeks of online qualifiers now. So we kind of talked about it last episode, was hoping for some massive tiebreakers. I was really looking at those 2 and 3 teams and the potential there. It turns out that the biggest tiebreaker comes for the multiple teams at 4 and 1, which is a tie for first place, which I can't remember the last time we saw that. So a lot of good stuff to talk about this episode, and I'm excited.
Yeah, so before we get to the actual matches, we want to talk about this Saudi Arabia esports news. Of course, this is not like an official report or anything. This comes from Zuma talking on the flank, and it was kind of like not a throwaway comment, but I don't believe they dived too deep into it, and I don't think he really knew too many details aside from the general news or the general topic. But on the flank, Zuma said while they were discussing, I believe, like the format of the CDL or what the future of maybe Call of Duty esports looks like. He said that what he has heard is that 2 current CDL organizations are trying to sell their spots in the CDL this coming off season, and that 2 Saudi teams are potentially coming in to replace those current CDL teams. So of course, Falcons esports team, Falcons, however they prefer to be called, they entered into the CDL this past offseason, buying the Vegas Legion's spot and became the Las Vegas Falcons. Of course, it has not really worked out too well for them, but they are one of 12 CDL teams, so there is some value in kind of that exclusivity. As for the other teams, Zuma did not know the esports organizations, the Saudi teams that would be buying in. Ben Nissim, he said, Twisted Minds he just guessed because I believe that's one of the bigger Saudi esports organizations. You and I both don't know very many. When Ben said Twisted Minds, and I just said this on the pre-show, I thought he meant Tainted Minds. I thought that a Saudi person or like an organization bought the Tainted Minds brand and just brought it to Saudi. I did not know of a Twisted Minds. Granted, I'm not like too tapped into a lot of other esports, but I would like to get your thoughts on this news. Of course, we've talked about expansion so much, but this would seem more like the Saudi involvement in the CDL is growing. In addition to Falcons, we have the Esports World Cup, which is technically not a part of the CDL, but it is something that the CDL is very, very much aware of and very much is kind of utilizing into their full competition schedule. So what do you think about Twisted Minds or any other Saudi esports organization potentially buying in to the CDL this coming off season?
Well, I think if we're gonna frame it in that manner and only consider it from like a Saudi perspective, the biggest question around that in my mind is what direction the team would want to go in, just based off of what we've seen from Falcons this year, where they attempted an all Saudi roster that was historically bad, did not win a series or a single hard point in over. I know the hard point streak was over 20 maps, so I think the series would have been over 15 series. Just counting off the top of my head, it would have been 7 qualifiers, probably 1 match at each minor, so eight, and then 2 matches. So let's just say 20-ish matches and 20 plus hard points. They didn't win for the All Saudi team. So that would be my biggest question there is what would these potential organizations be looking to do if they're looking to buy a current spot and attempt an All Saudi project themselves. I think that could be a big issue in terms of the competitive level of the league. We've talked about it already multiple times in the sense of like, teams like Miami with an all Spanish roster and then this all Saudi project were taking away potential spots from uh, CDL level players or just former players in the sense of if there's only 12 teams and 2 are region locked, for lack of a better term, then there's really only 40 starting spots in the CDL for NA and EU players and that sort of thing. So technically, if another Saudi team, well, I mean, let's just say 2 Saudi teams acquire 2 current teams, there's no expansion, and they decide to do all Saudi rosters, then I guess Vegas doesn't count anymore. But that would mean 3 of the 12 teams, to 25% of the league, would be effectively region locked, for lack of a better term or way to describe it there. So that would be my biggest question around that. Obviously, there's also the, for people more tuned into like the political aspects and all that around the Saudi stuff, which I am definitely no expert in. I know there would be complaints and criticisms around that too. So I'm not gonna speak on that part because I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to all that, and I just know there's a lot of people who don't like the sports washing or whatever it's called in other leagues and whatnot. But I think big picture for me, we have to remember that last offseason, there were several reports around legacy esports brands potentially being interested in entering the CDL. I remember Liquid, Fnatic, I think Gen G, Space Station Gaming, isn't like, a legacy brand compared to those other 3, but there were like reports and rumors around several teams being interested in acquiring current CDL franchise spots. And we would just have to see, like, maybe this like opens the door and some of those other teams hear that, a Saudi team is interested, and then they're like, oh, maybe this is another opportunity. So maybe this like kickstarts that conversation and some other teams start to get involved in looking to enter the CDL again. Obviously, as you kind of set it up to, expansion would be a great answer. I still think 16 teams would be the ideal number of teams to have for just like brackets and being able to do like pool play for tournaments and all that good stuff. So there's a lot we don't know around this current situation. Also worth mentioning too that just last offseason we had the reports of Boston potentially leaving the scene. Carolina, I think it was Carolina and LAG were the 2 that were like linked to some of those esports legacy brands, and obviously LAG now in its like partnership with Gentlemate, so that would presumably take them out of the conversation. But if 2 teams are potentially looking at moving out of the CDL ownership right now, I would say Boston and Carolina would be probably 2 of the most likely, just based on some of the reports and stuff from last offseason. And, especially like Boston, I don't think they played pretty well these last qualifiers, but just the apparent unwillingness to potentially make a roster move this year could signal like just that the financial situation for the Boston Breach at this current time, which makes it seem like they could potentially be looking to sell. So I just think overall a lot of questions about all this stuff, and we'll probably hear more about it in the months to come after the season actually ends. But never a bad time to talk about this sort of aspect of the CDL. I think it will be interesting, and I think at the end of the day, people can say what they want about, potentially the Saudi team's involvement and whatnot. But at least at some level, we've seen it before with like the Paris Legion. If an organization that was seemingly unwilling to spend a lot of money and invest heavily in the CDL and competitive Call of Duty is replaced by an organization that seemingly is willing to be more invested, then that seems like on the surface it should be a positive move. Obviously, there are definitely factors beyond that simplicity of that statement that have to be considered as well. But end of the day, I do think it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Yeah, I don't want to have like a too long discussion, obviously, about sports washing, but I do think that if a fourth of the league, if the CDL stays at 12 teams and 3 Saudi teams are a part of it, a fourth of the league is Saudi owned. I think then that you have to have a conversation about sports washing and just the Saudi Arabian influence in the CDL at that point, simply because, well, first of all, like, it's obvious what Saudi Arabia in general is doing. Like, they are really trying to push to be like this hub for sports and entertainment. I mean, they signed a bunch of soccer players to lucrative contracts to attract these big names. They have basically bought a ton of influence in boxing, in professional wrestling. They have WWE that hold events there, Formula One and Formula E. A lot of the racing stuff happens in Saudi Arabia. They even, obviously, the golf thing is been talked about a lot, but they've talked about, or there have been conversations, I guess, about potentially starting a basketball league that would try to rival the NBA. So there is stuff like that where it is obvious that the country as a whole, or the leadership in the country, is trying to make inroads to be like a big player in sports and entertainment. And for esports specifically, it's been a big part of the last few years. I think mostly because Saudi Arabia is hosting the first Olympic esports games in 2027. So that is obviously, they're pretty much trying to build infrastructure in some kind of esports culture, or build upon the esports culture that's already been there. So that, I think that's a big part of it. But like you, I think there is some kind of conflicting feelings, because you don't want these organizations that don't have the means nor the apparent desire, I guess, to compete and to really add anything to the CDL. The Paris and Vegas Legion, we talked about at length that how they were pretty much skating by and trying to be as profitable, or I guess as the least losing team in terms of their money. But they didn't do anything. They weren't competitive. They just kind of dragged down the competitiveness of the league. And there have been other teams in the past that have done that as well. So if they come in, these organizations come in and they do not compete and they try to sign Saudi rosters, which we've seen is just not going to be viable, at least in the short term. In terms of, maybe if the league expands, maybe there's something to happen there, just because the competition would likely go down across the board. But I feel conflicted about it, because if organizations come in and they spend money and they try to promote the league and they have a vested interest in doing so, then that would seem like a positive addition to the league. It's just, we don't know how genuine those efforts are. It could be similar to what we saw when the CDL started in like 2018, 2019, and a lot of other esports, where you have these non-endemic brands that came in and poured a bunch of money immediately in to esports, and then found out, oh wow, we're not really getting a huge return on our investment. We're actually losing a lot of money. This is not worth it. And then they pulled out, and they'll be back if esports becomes profitable and this becomes like a really big deal. Then those same endemic brands or non-endemic brands, that tried to, I would say, leech off of esports. They'll try to come back and leech off it again. It's a little bit different for Saudi Arabia, of course. It's not all about profit. It's actually the opposite. I don't think a lot of times that they care. At least the government. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of who owns Falcons or any of the Saudi orgs. So it might not just be, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which is pretty much the country trying to pour money into these different causes and whatnot. So maybe it is an individual, and maybe that's different. But I think there is a real conversation to be had about that sort of stuff. And I would also say that there's a bigger conversation probably, and one that is more likely to actually happen in COD esports. And it's the sustainability of these organizations coming in if they're going to try to compete, because those organizations most likely are going to have the money to compete and to pay big salaries to players. And we just got out of, we're essentially seeing a salary bubble bursting in the CDL, where a lot of the biggest and most popular players have retired or left the scene in some shape or form over the last 5 years. And salaries have, as far as I know, decreased pretty starkly across the board in the CDL. If 3 Saudi teams are actually trying to compete and they're willing to pay a lot of money to these players to compete, then that's going to force these other teams to kind of nut up or shut up. Like Optic is going, Optic, LAT, FaZe, maybe Toronto, C9. Those organizations might pay a lot more money to their players than they're comfortable with, which is good for the players, but not necessarily great for the overall health of COD esports, which I think is important to at least keep in mind, because this is such a tenuous kind of footing that the CDL is on. Like, it's not a profitable thing. Media rights aren't very big, so they don't really have a lot of income. So if the organizations have to pay a lot more money, maybe it just isn't worth it for them. And then who knows what the future of the CDL looks like. We don't even know what it looks like in general, but if they have to pay more, I think it would be something to keep an eye on. That being said, Saudi teams are, if they do have money, which I'm assuming if they're entering COD esports in 2025, that they have some money to kind of burn, I would just assume. Maybe they'll be more willing to host events, to host LAN events. Granted, I'm not sure everybody wants to fly to the Middle East every month or every month and a half, but I do think that is a potential option, that these teams kind of front the cost, and the CDL can say, hey, at least you get your LAN events, and these other teams, maybe we could add more LAN events if these organizations are more willing to do so than the current teams. But yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. I would imagine that the 2 teams to exit, if these teams end up buying in, is Boston and Carolina. I can't think of any other 2 teams that would really fit the bill, just based on what we've heard and just like the overall logic. Like Miami came in, they seem pretty committed to doing this. C9 just bought in, G2 just bought in. Maybe you could talk yourself into like Luminosity saying that, hey, we want to get out, but they're kind of like a historic brand at this point with Call of Duty. Like, they've been involved in so long, and I don't see like Optic or LAT, FaZe. I know FaZe is like cut back and stuff, but I feel like there's probably some kind of I just don't see it happening, I guess. I think it's pretty big news if it does happen. Of course, we'll see. It's probably a few months down the line at least to hear more about this kind of information.
And I'll just say real quick too, in terms of the event stuff that you said, like, even we saw earlier this year that Toronto hosted Major 1 in Madrid, right? So it's like, even if these new teams that enter are Saudi based, like, they could technically, one of the new teams could be a Saudi team, and they could host an event in London and instantly become like the EU community would be like, oh my god, this is my new favorite team. Like,
that's a good idea.
That's like, so like, just because it's a Saudi team, and I think really the precedent was set this year, because in previous years I can't think of any other time where an event was hosted like by a team and not actually in like the vicinity of where that team is technically based, outside of those couple events that were supposed to happen with like the New York one that got changed to
Go Boston,
the
right?
LA with no fans,
Oh
or
yeah,
there were two events that got chalked and ended up being events with no fans. I think one was in Columbus,
yeah, it
um,
was.
and then one was in LA last year with like the cage match or whatever, which was I kind of liked it, but obviously it would have been better with fans. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, uh, lots more details and whatnot will surely come out over the weeks and months ahead, and we'll be here to cover all those as we see them.
Yeah, and one last thing that I forgot to bring up: if these teams enter in, and there are 3 Saudi teams, the EWC becomes a much bigger deal.
Sure.
That definitely will get pushed like to. I guess the importance is already great just because of the money, but they would certainly try to push that prestige factor and try to make that like a kind of the grand finale, which I like the idea that EWC becomes old champs and we still have the CDL champs, and we have these 2 different events and it's not just the exact same stuff. But we'd have to get there. But I do think that that could be something to watch out for as well. But yeah, that about does it for that conversation. Of course, we'll talk more about it if more stuff comes up. But we do have a lot of matches to talk about. We have 10 matches, but 10, I wouldn't say 10 important matches because some of these weren't the most important, but like you broke it down or mentioned in the intro, there was a lot at stake in these matches today or this weekend. Because this was, of course, the final weekend of the Major 3 qualifiers, and we've talked about it quite a few times before, but there were only 5 qualifying matches for each team this round versus 7 in the Major 1 and Major 2 qualifiers, which is, it makes everything more interesting. It makes every match more important to many of these teams, and a lot of tiebreakers were hopefully broken, but it didn't quite work out that way this weekend. I think the top line headline, I guess, I don't know if it is for you, but for me, it is my Boston boys. The Boston Breach going 2-0 this week, which is pretty incredible. And because they went 2-0, they tied for first place in the qualifier standings. I don't know how often that has happened for Boston to do that. Maybe never, to be quite honest. But they beat today. They beat Vegas Falcons. They reverse sweep Vegas, which is just horrible for the Falcons considering they've only won 1 match to this point. Previously, Boston beat C9 earlier in the weekend, which was actually pretty one-sided. Like it was a 3-0 control, and they dominated the hard point. I don't know if this is your top line headline or whatever, or if this is like your biggest story, but it did feel notable that Boston had this great of a weekend and this great of a qualifier set, considering how doom and gloom I think we rightfully were coming into these qualifiers. So what did you think of Boston?
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. I'm seeing what was this Seattle? Oh, so this was the Seattle team with actually Max 7 Pred. Okay, so 2023 Major 3 qualifier, so exactly 2 years ago. Boston tied with the Seattle Surge at 4-1 for first place, but I'm assuming Seattle beat Boston. No, they did not play. It doesn't look like. It doesn't look like they played, but Seattle had a 13-5 map count. Boston was 13-8. So I guess that's how the tiebreaker shook out there. But yeah, that is previously the only time I'm seeing a couple third place finishes in qualifiers for Boston Breach. But that Major 3 2023 qualifiers was previously Boston's best finish in the qualifiers at second, where they also went 4-1. So this is essentially, I said 13-8, and they were 14-6 map count in these qualifiers. So I think it's safe to say these are the best qualifiers that Boston's had. They did pretty well in the Major 1 qualifiers, and that's when they got third. So let me
Mm-hmm.
just, that was more map count. I knew they went 5-2. They were 17-15 map count though.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they were
so
going to game 5 literally every series pretty
yeah.
much.
So I'll still say I think you can really go either way with answering what's the best qualifiers for Boston, but I'll pick for now these ones just because 4-1's a little better than 5-2, even though it's fewer matches and the map count's better this time around than last time. But nonetheless, yeah, I think that's we'll talk pick 'em at the end here, but a big part of the way our personal pick 'em has been shaken out is me picking against Boston, and it couldn't have gone worse for me this time around just because Boston's been playing better. And I think a big part of that, I'd have to look at all of the um, maps that they've played to have a really good idea. And I'm seeing in my notes here, I got some purge stat lines written down, but I feel like Cammy, just in general, I know today he played really well in the control against Vegas to kickstart that reverse sweep. But I feel like without having those actual stats to back it up, like I'm saying right here, I'm just going to say I feel like Cammy is playing much better this set of qualifiers than he had previously in the season. He was really, in my eyes, and I feel like, and in the eyes of a lot of people in the community, he was kind of the weak link on this team. And if they did decide to make a roster change, it felt like he would be the player who would be targeted to be replaced. So to have him step up and potentially playing better for his own sake and just elevating the team by playing better too, that's got to be an exciting thing for Boston fans in general. I'm still not really sold on this team.
That was gonna be my
Again,
next
just
question.
because, yeah, I mean, like, we bring up um the major one qualifiers where they do pretty well there, but then they translate that into a top 12 finish at major one itself. So they're gonna have to go on a bit of a run here at major three for me to actually think that, or just seeing them translate the qualifier success into land success. That's what I'm going to need to see as the next step for this team. I'm just not sold on it actually happening, but I've been wrong about them for the last couple of weeks so far, so we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, just because they've consistently performed well in the qualifiers, or average, I guess, because they went 5-2 in the major one qualifiers, and then I believe 3-4 in the major two qualifiers. So you average that out, they're about 500, and here they finished 4-1, and if they had to probably play two more qualifiers, I imagine they would have picked up another loss or two. But still, like I just think it's just interesting because this is not a roster I would think could necessarily match up with a lot of the teams that they beat. Even though they're not always beating great teams, they have beat great teams. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's the fact that they're one of the very few rosters to have not made a change at all this season, or even over the offseason. So they had a long time to get used to each other. They played with each other back in whatever that was, June or July, as part of the Esports World Cup. They stuck through all of that. They've been together for now 10 or so months. I don't know if it's just a chemistry thing, and that is, I believe it was I think it was a Challengers player said the skill gap in this game is teamwork. And I think that was in connection with Optic Texas struggling and them changing their roster, and then you kind of have to start over in a way when you do that, and struggling when you change a roster I think is pretty common for a lot of teams, but if that is the case, if this game relies more heavily on teamwork as like a way to determine which team is actually better, which has not always been the case. A lot of times it is more just skill based, like we have a lot more talent and we're going to beat you as a result of that. Boston has kind of flipped that on its head so far this season in some ways, and then in some ways they don't necessarily show up and prove that at all. So I'm just very impressed by this team. I think that they'll probably, unless they just absolutely get demolished at Major 3, which is very much a possibility, I just imagine that this team is going to go the distance with each other. I don't see them making a roster change, which would make them I think one of only 3 teams this year. No, 4 teams, because it's like Toronto, FaZe, LAT, and Boston, I think, are the only teams now that haven't made a change. Which, if you had said at the beginning of the season that Boston would be one of the only teams,
Cloud9 too.
oh, Cloud9 as well. Yeah, but so you look at those other teams, and those other 4 teams you would expect to be like in the top 5, top 6, and a lot of them are, but you would just not expect that Boston, unless it's just for financial issues, would not make a change. And maybe that's the case, but it's also worked out in their favor, to be honest, because I believe they're in 6th place in the standings now, and if they have a decent showing at Major 3, and Carolina, which just made a roster change, if they don't have a great showing, then that gap between 5th and 6th can close very, very quickly and make the race in the Major 4 qualifiers even more intriguing than it already is. So yeah, I think Boston going 2-0 is a pretty incredible story. Going 4-1 is pretty awesome. So yeah, they finish atop the Major 1 qualifier standings in a 5-way tie. I think that's probably, if I'm not like a Boston homer, I think it's probably that is the most interesting part of all of this, is that Boston, I think, technically gets the 2nd seed as a result of tiebreaker, and LAT gets the 1st. But the 5-way tie breaks down as LAT 1, Boston 2, Vancouver 3, Miami 4, and Toronto at 5. All of these teams were 4-1 to finish the qualifiers, all with different map counts. Is it a biggest surprise to you to see Miami here? Because we talked so much about them on the last week's episode. Were you expecting them to go 2-0 this week? I don't remember if you picked them or not. So if they had gone 2-0, they would be the number 1 seed heading in. But are you surprised to see them at 4-1 to finish these qualifier standings?
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like if you asked me that before the Major 3 qualifiers, I'd be surprised. But the way that Miami had looked the past 2 weeks, to see them at 4-1, that's not surprising at all. I'm betting pretty high on this Miami team with the addition of Super. I think Super and Rancor have worked really well together. It just came down to the last match for Miami, I believe. Oh no, so they did play twice this week, but they played the first match of the week was this week, Friday, Miami versus Toronto, and Toronto beat them 3-1. The only map that Miami won was a round 11 6-5 dealership S&D, the second map in that series. So Toronto won the 3 respawns, but the control was a 3-1. So that's not, a lot of controls go around 5. So I guess that's technically not a super close control, but it was 250 to 240 in the Vault hardpoint map 1 and 250 to 190 in the Protocol hardpoint. And those are pretty close hardpoints. So obviously in the grand scheme of the qualifier standings here, that's a tough loss for Miami, because like you said, they win that one and they win their second match after it. They're 5-0, sitting atop the standings as the 1st seed heading into Major 3. But the way the tiebreakers work out, and we'll be talking about this more later, and even next episode, we're getting a rematch of Miami versus Toronto in the first round of the winners bracket at Major 3, because like you said, with all the 4-1 teams, that the 4th and 5th seeds are both 4-1. So that's pretty crazy. It's also, just looking at that, the standings wise, like Toronto kind of gets the short end of the stick in the sense of they go 4-1, and they are the one team that beat LA Thieves, and Toronto gets the 5th seed and LAT gets the 1 seed. But to play devil's advocate, we have noted so far this year the 1 seed is 0-2 in first round matchups of the winners bracket of Major so far this year. Yeah. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise for Toronto.
Yeah, and LAT is one of those 0-2. So they definitely, I don't think they believe in jinxes, but we will definitely see if that holds up.
And I'm gonna go out on a limb too. I've been looking at this bracket now since the qualifiers, and I'm really excited to dive into the bracket because I think all of these first round matchups are interesting due to some reason. But if LA Thieves continue the trend of losing in the first round of Major 1, it might be the biggest upset of the season.
Yeah, and
I'll leave it at that.
we should talk about Carolina real quick too, because this was the first time that we got to see Dylan Rex in the CDL. He, of course, signed with Carolina, replacing Vivid in Carolina's starting lineup. He debuts against the one team that Carolina has had the most trouble with. I'm not saying that Carolina hasn't had trouble with other teams, but LA Thieves have put them in the dirt time and time again, and it continued. It was not a Vivid issue because they played the very last match of the weekend. They just finished up like 2 hours ago now. LAT won 3-0 as they've done, I think, every single time. I don't think Carolina has taken a map off of them so far this season. If they have, it's like one, and they played like 5 or 6 times this year. But LAT won by almost 120 points in hardpoint. They won 6-2 in search. They won 3-0 in control. This was a stomp from start to finish. Does this... I think we obviously have to give it more time for Rex. I don't think we, like bench him, release him or whatever. Yeah. But would this, if you're Carolina, would this concern you at all that there was seemingly no change in result between Vivid and Rex?
I definitely not. I think the most concerning thing, again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here talking about Major 3 when we're still in the qualifiers. But the most concerning thing for Carolina has to be that they aren't going to realistically, they aren't going to be able to get a good read on how Rex has impacted the team because his one match so far has been against LA Thieves. Like you said, they've dominated them every time. And his next match in the CDL is going to be against LA Thieves. So, unless something drastic happens over the next couple days, we're most likely looking at Carolina playing in the first round of the losers bracket, and then that will be the first real test, I guess, for Rex to see that'll be more of a fair evaluation to see what kind of impact he can have on this team. I said it before. I don't remember if it was last episode or the episode before when we were diving really into the Rex change. But I did say with the position Carolina is in the CDL points standings and where they were just in the qualifier standings and everything like that, this was a move. By making this move during the Major 3 qualifiers as opposed to ahead of the qualifiers, this is a move that Carolina is making because they have to, at least in my eyes, the question internally they'd be asking is, does replacing Vivid with Rex give us a better chance to succeed at champs and EWC at the end of the year? And if they answered that question yes, that's why they make this move. If they answered the question no, then that's why they would have stuck with Vivid. So in my mind, again, I don't want to just throw, I said this last time too, I don't want to just throw these Major 3 qualifiers and Major 3 just completely out the window for Carolina. Because that discredits what this team has done up to this point this year, even though we've talked about the struggles against the top teams, even outside of LA Thieves. But it's just it'd be totally unfair to just say Rex stinks and, he's got to be dropped after one match against a team that has dominated these 3 basically players on his team and in a lot of the league too. So no, definitely not. Definitely can't give up on Rex after this. It's just completely. This is one of those cases. I mean, I even said it when Vancouver was playing FaZe in Neptune's first match of the Major 2 qualifiers and his return to the CDL. I was like, you never want to play one of those top teams in your first match. You'd much rather play a team lower on the standings. So that, you get your feet wet a little bit and, get the ball rolling, and then you can play some of those tougher teams. Obviously, in Vancouver and Neptune's case, they were able to beat FaZe in that first match, and, so it doesn't work that way for everybody, though. And that's, unfortunately, what's going on here with Rex. So I really wasn't even super focused on Rex, and I honestly, I don't even know how much his POV was being shown on the stream because the series was so quick and it felt like it was a lot of LA Thieves on the screen. So definitely just, this is a match you just got to move on from. And for Carolina in particular, they got to be like, oh, we got to play these guys again at the major. And, I'm not an expert level coach or anything like that in terms of the vetoes and whatnot for especially this Call of Duty. But if I'm Brian Saint for Carolina, I am trying to throw the biggest curveball of all time in the vetoes for this matchup, just because like nothing has worked previously. So even if there's like some map that Carolina is like 0-10 on in hardpoint, Brian Saint might just be like, yeah, screw it. We're going to play it this time, because what's the worst that happens? We lose another hard point to these guys in the 100-point club. And that's the only other thing I wanted to bring up from this series is I was watching the Scump watch party for the Optic versus FaZe match today. They ended the watch party after that match to go watch the Halo tournament. So I was like, I'm going to watch the last match, LA Thieves versus Carolina, and I saw Octane was doing his watch party. I've never really watched Octane's watch party, so I just threw it on for the last match, and he said something. He was like, he was not really joking, but kind of joking in the sense of like he didn't know if this was like the most points that Carolina had scored in a hard point against LA Thieves this year, because it was 250-134 in map 1. And he also wasn't, he was like, he like kind of just like threw it out there, like how many points have Carolina scored overall this season against LA Thieves, because he didn't think it was that much. And a Twitter user, CJA27, replied, and Octane quote tweeted it. And according to them, Carolina's played 6 hard points against LA Thieves this year and have scored 611 points in the 6 hardpoint maps, which averages to 95 a game. So I did not fact check that to see if it's correct, but it definitely feels right, and that's just a crazy stat.
Well, I was looking up because I wanted to make sure that they hadn't won a map, and they actually did. Carolina did beat LAT in one singular map in the 5 series that they played.
Search?
So yes, they won a red card search. It was the first round of Major 1. That Carolina, they won 6-4 on red card search. That is their one map. They're 1-15 against LAT overall this season. What I found even more interesting was in that same series where Carolina won their one and only map, the hardpoint scores. Hacienda hardpoint game 1 250-47. Skyline hardpoint game 4 250-66. So combined they had 113 points between 2 hardpoints. So yeah, I could see how Carolina has been on average a 100-point club by this one team. It's pretty incredible, but yeah, it shows that the gap between these two teams has been incredibly large. And the roster change, as we spoke about over the past few episodes, it makes a lot of sense if you're just trying to close that gap, try to take some maps off of these guys. If they could force a game 5 against LAT, that would feel like a win, I'm sure, for Carolina at this point.
It might be a personal win for them if they hit 200 in hard play.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. And Carolina has not been a bad team. Like, they've beaten pretty much every other team in the bottom 6 or 7, and it's just been these top teams, but LAT in particular, that they've really struggled against. But yeah, I don't know what the solution really is, but I was also thinking about it when you were talking. If Carolina, as they're more likely than not to do, if they lose to LAT in round 1, they drop down and they would play Minnesota in the losers bracket. Let's say that they won that match against Minnesota. They would very likely play either Miami or Toronto in the second round of the losers bracket. There's a good chance that they lose that match, which would give them a top 8 finish. And depending on if Boston could win their round 1 match I'm not saying very easily, but like that's a very realistic thing that could happen. And as a result, Boston would probably finish ahead of them in the major. The gap gets a lot tighter at that point. And starting these qualifiers, Carolina was in 4th place in the standings. maybe even third, to be honest. I don't even know.
Four.
But they've been like right there. Like they were, not very far away from either of these teams. But now they're behind Toronto and Vancouver. Vancouver jumped them, I think, 2 weeks ago. And if Boston closes that gap, then they're looking at like potentially sliding down to sixth at some point, which is pretty crazy for a team that has been relatively consistent throughout this year. So yeah, it's pretty tight for Carolina. They want to be able to at least see some improvement. So yeah, they might have to take some chances. They might have to say, okay, the short-term results might not be great, but we're trying to look toward the end of the season and trying to look toward champs. But I mean, the seeding might, I hate to say it, but the seeding might screw them in the end, because what if LAT were to get like the second, they probably won't get the third seed, but they could get the third seed. And then Carolina's in the same exact position where round one of champs, they're playing LAT. And I mean, that would be demoralizing for them. Of course, champs has the factor of, being kind of unpredictable. We do see a lot of upsets, but man, that would be awful for this team. So a lot does depend on how they finish the season. And if they struggle, there's a real good chance that they might end up sliding to a place where champs is not looking very good at all for them. Another team I wanted to talk about, though, real quick, was Atlanta FaZe, because they finished relatively strong. I believe they only had one match. No, they had two matches this week. They had one on Saturday and then one today, and they win both. The only problem I see is that they lose both opening hardpoints rather convincingly. They lose hardpoint to Vegas, which is, again, pretty crazy to think about just 3 weeks ago at this point. They lose 250 to 133 on Skyline. They end up winning the rest of the series and win 3-1. They do the same thing against Optic. They lose 250 to 143 on Hacienda, and then win the rest of the series, even though that was a really, really close match. Like, this is probably the most competitive match of the entire weekend, even though it didn't get to a game 5. The final hard point comes down to 6 points. They go to round 11 search. This was a very winnable series for Optic. I don't know what you think, but is there any kind of concern about FaZe? Not as like, oh, they're going to get top 12 or whatever, but like, this is the team that has gone back-to-back at majors, undoubtedly the best team in the world, at least on LAN, but there have been some inconsistencies in these online qualifiers. They end up finishing 6th in these qualifiers, which, they finished 6th in the Major 1 qualifiers, and we were dooming and glooming for about a month straight because of how bad they looked in the first week or two of those qualifiers. So is there any concern or kind of trepidation now that FaZe has finished these qualifiers and have not looked as convincing as they have in some previous matches?
Yeah, no, I mean, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Even before you posed this question, I went back and looked after their series today, because I really, in my mind, I was like, did FaZe lose map 1 of all 5 qualifiers this stage? And they went 1-4 in map 1s. They won map 1 against Miami, and then they lost the next 3 maps. So that was the only, they lost a map 1 to Carolina, who we've talked about Carolina's hard point multiple times this year. And the hard point they won in that series was 250 to 242. That they being Atlanta won protocol hardpoint map 4 250 242, so it was really close. The thing for me with Atlanta and this Carolina series from earlier in the qualifiers is really like what stuck out to me, because I remember saying this to some degree when this match happened, was Atlanta lost map 1, and I was thinking like, uh-oh, here we go, bad things might happen. And then they 6-0 the search and 3-0 the control. So 9-0 rounds after that map 1 hard point loss to go up 2-1 in a series, which you can't rely on that all the time. But for a team like Atlanta, you can rely on that kind of consistently just because of how good they are in search historically. So that's what literally happened in the series today. It wasn't 6-0, 3-0 in the controls, but like for the Optic one, it went to around 11 that Optic had Skies had a cruise missile that he called in, and it was a 4v4 4v4 bomb down for Optic. Atlanta had the defuse with like 30 seconds left, and Optic had a cruise missile, and they kind of
I don't even think they got a kill that round. I think
no, they might have got one at most, but yeah, so it was kind of a weird round 11, but that's around 11 away from potentially FaZe going down 2-0 to Optic, and we've talked about Optic at length these qualifier stage, and then even the last hard point here for Atlanta was a 250 to 244, and it was just a banger ending that really could have went either way. And to expand on that a little bit more, the same kind of recipe for Vegas. This was the one I was thinking of compared to the Carolina one, where Vegas wins map 1 hardpoint against Atlanta 250 to 133. Pred and Exnid both dropping over 30 kills, and then Atlanta wins 6-0 on dealership search, 3-0 protocol control, and they win the map 3 hardpoint. It's 250 to 241, so it's a really close hardpoint in the end, but Atlanta squeaks it out and they get a 3-1 series victory, which could feel a little deceiving for how the maps actually went, which I guess that's not really fair just because the searches and control were really dominant. But yeah, at the end of the day, I definitely have some level of concern for Atlanta's hardpoint, and I think I went back and I just got it. The before map 4 today, if anybody else wants to look at the official CDL broadcast or go back in the VOD for Atlanta versus Optic, before map 4 started in that series today, the CDL broadcast put up a graphic on aBeZy in the Major 3 qualifiers so far, and if they posted his hardpoint stats, he has a 0.78 KD, which is 47th. Now, if you figure 12 teams in the CDL, that would be 47th out of 48, but I'd guess it would be
probably 49 or 50.
Rex hadn't even played yet, so it should be 48. I can't think of anybody who
came in.
But they didn't make a mid-major change. The only mid change in the middle would have been Rex, and Rex hadn't played before that. So it should be 48. So, but regardless, 47th isn't good, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, true.
Kills per 10 minutes, they had aBeZy at 21.7, which was 44th.
Better.
Damage per 10 minutes, they had him at 2,700, which was last. They actually wrote last.
First.
And instead of 48th, and then hill time per 10 minutes, he's at 40.4, I assume, seconds, and that was 47th. So
not great.
Not good numbers, and I'm not, I have sung aBeZy's praises for years on this podcast. I love his style of play. It's just obviously you look at those numbers and they wouldn't have included maybe they included the first map against Optic, I don't know. But regardless, it's just not great for aBeZy, and it kind of, I don't want to put it all on him, but if he's posting numbers that are that drastically low in terms of, all of the players in the CDL, it kind of makes a little sense that FaZe would be struggling in hardpoint while that's happening. So I'm going to be looking at him. I mean, obviously he's just an all-time great player and too good of a player for that to continue. So maybe, the weird thing is like the hill time is down and the kills per 10 minutes are low. So it's not like he's sitting in the hill and not getting in engagements. And it's just like he's got to be on the map and he's just losing gunfights, and it's causing him to have, if I would assume he's only getting, 21.7 kills per 10 minutes, he's probably looking at a lot of score lines where he's like 21 kills, 30 plus deaths, and he's dying outside of the hill, so that's why the hill time is low. And I don't know, but it's just, overall that's got to change if FaZe are gonna be the team that we all know they're capable of, and especially be the team that we expect them to be in terms of the level of play for them in hardpoint. So I definitely shout out the CDL. I'm assuming Easy Mac had a big part to do with that graphic, but when they put stuff up like that during the broadcast, that that really stuck with me, and that was pretty eye opening. So definitely something to keep an eye on for FaZe in terms of what to expect from the Major 3.
Yeah, they have been an excellent team in general, but especially in hardpoint, they've been very dominant. That's by far their best game mode this year. Before these qualifiers, they were 33-14 in hardpoint. In these qualifiers, they went 4-6. So that is obviously a major departure for this team. And I was looking up at the stats, Breaking Point, breakingpoint.gg, like the best website for this kind of stuff. So before these qualifiers, Abizi had the worst KD in hardpoint on the team, which is actually not surprising considering his play style. It's more feast or famine than a lot of these other guys. But he had a .97 KD. Everybody else on his team in hardpoint before these qualifiers had at least a 1.1 KD. Cell had the top is 1.14. Draza and Simp both had 1.10s, which I mean, if you're doing that, like it's pretty obvious that you're going to win a lot of maps. In these qualifiers, though, Cell was the only one to remotely stay even. He had a 1.1, which just kind of shows like he's kind of ridiculous. But Draza dropped to a 0.94, Simp to a 0.89, and Abizi was a 0.8. So it kind of improved, I guess, over the course of today. But yeah, that's not great. Not in the slightest. I think probably the biggest thing is like, and this is, I guess, an extension of just dying a lot and not getting a lot of kills. The OBJ stuff for Draza and Abizi cratered in these qualifiers. The team was relatively even. They're all floating around 60 per 10 minutes. And in these qualifiers, Simp and Celium were doing the heavy lifting. They both had the exact same OBJ per 10 minutes at 61.79. Draza and Abizi both had around 40. So that's really bad, and I don't know if that's just an anomaly, if that's not something to read into. Of course, FaZe has, they did not finish. I guess you can't say they didn't finish these qualifiers well because they've done this every single time, it feels like, where they start slow and then they're kind of clicking more into gear as they get to the major. Major 1 obviously being like I think they finished on a match win streak in the qualifiers. I don't think minor included, so more than that.
It had to have been because they started 0-3 in those Major 1 qualifiers.
And then Major 2, I believe they did something similar because they lost to Vancouver in the minor and in the qualifiers, and then won. And this time, I believe they lost 2 of their first 3 matches, and then they finished with 2 wins this week. So I don't know what to really make of it. I did even go back and look to see historically how FaZe has done in qualifiers, and I found this interesting. They've only finished 6th or worse this would be their 4th time. So before this, it would have been 3. 2 of the 3 times that they finished 6th or worse in the qualifiers, they've ended up winning those majors. So they won, I believe, Major 2 years ago, and then obviously they won Major 1 this season. And I think the other one they finished 2nd or 3rd. So they're usually pretty good. They usually can be relied upon in these majors. I don't think if you're betting or if you're just kind of looking to see like who's going to win, I would still place my money both physically and just theoretically on FaZe because they've proven that they can beat most of these teams. Well, they've proven they can beat any team in the CDL, and I would think that they're probably the most reliable bet of any CDL team so far this season. But yeah, I don't know. FaZe is FaZe. They're just a weird team, and we don't know how all the time if they're actually putting as much effort and thought into these qualifiers as they do the majors. I think they kind of turn it up a level when they get to LAN. But LAT, that's one team that they did not play around in these qualifiers. They did have the slip up early, but they finished with the number 1 seed, 14-3 map count. I think they have to have the best map count in these online qualifiers, like in total, because they lost 2 maps the last qualifiers. So they've kind of dominated the online stuff. Do you have any concern or that they won't be able to kind of translate that to LAN again? Of course, they did really well at Major 1. Then they had a really disappointing finish at Major 2.
No, I mean, I'm gonna be totally honest, and you know, you kind of were just saying like, in terms of talking about picking FaZe and whatnot. I mean, if you had a gun to my head right now and I had to pick one team to win Major 3, I'm probably going with LA Thieves at this point.
Interesting, yeah.
And really, I mean, that comes down to, I mean, a large part of that is LAT's first round matchup here being against Carolina in
Yeah.
Major 3 that almost assures they're going to be in winners round 2.
Well,
And
not that you just said that.
yeah.
That was a hard jinx. Oh my goodness.
um but assuming they beat Carolina there, then they're playing the winner of Miami versus Toronto, and you can look at that and say Toronto is the one team that beat LA Thieves in these qualifiers, and I think Toronto would have been the team that eliminated them from Major 2, I believe.
Yeah, I
I'm pretty
believe
sure that's
so.
when like Beans was talking trash and started, and then he like posted the uh the thing about like Scrap doubling his earnings or whatever. um yeah, Toronto 3-0'd LA Thieves, and LA Thieves got fourth at Major 2 as a result of that. So that's not necessarily the easiest round 2 matchup in terms of looking at the bracket. But on the other hand, if you're looking at it from a FaZe perspective, FaZe have to play Vancouver in the first round, which they beat FaZe beat Vancouver twice at Major 2, but before that, Vancouver did have a couple wins against FaZe, so that's definitely not as easy of a first round matchup on paper as LA Thieves matchup. And then if FaZe beat Vancouver, they got to go through either a red hot Boston or an Optic team that potentially is playing after winning and maybe having some confidence. So I just think in a very small sample size. I'm already talking about some of the stuff we want to talk about next episode, but I feel like the top half of the bracket for the winners bracket at Major 3 is a little more forgiving right now, and I guess that is largely based on that Thieves versus Carolina matchup. But regardless, yeah, I think LA Thieves are in a really good spot right now. Um, I do think you know we'll have to see if the number one overall seed curse really is a curse or not. But if they're able to get through that, I do think LA Thieves are in a really strong position to be a favorite to take this tournament, especially yeah, I it's tough because let's just say they do match up against FaZe in the grand finals again, which is what
Yeah.
we all want to see. Even in that best of 7 we saw at Major 1, like I'm pretty sure Thieves were winning the hard points there, but FaZe was winning the searches. So
Yeah.
like,
It's been a
you
while
know,
too.
it's been a while, but what I'm saying, like, if the concern for FaZe right now is their hard point, and they already won an event this year against Thieves where they didn't have to do it through the hard points, they did it through the searches, how much of that concern is really a concern, unless that concern becomes the thing that prevents FaZe from even reaching the grand final. So we'll have to see what it is. But to get back on track with you talking about these, yeah, I'm really, I think they're in a really good spot. I just think especially I feel like Scrap's been frying. I feel like Hydra's been playing really well. I saw some really I think it well, I watched the match today in Octane's chat, but I think I saw it in Scumps, and it's just people talking smack about Ghosty being like Ghosty's the weak link on the team, yada yada. And yeah, I think it was in Scump's chat that I saw it, but that doesn't make sense because I said I was watching the LA Thieves, so maybe it was before LA Thieves played. But regardless, I just want to say in general, the whole conversation or narrative around Ghosty in my eyes has been for these past 2 years really, not even considering this year, and I've said this before, we saw in his first stint with Optic and his first stint with the CDL, we saw a player who's dropping a 1.4 in challengers,
Hmm.
enter a team with other superstars and be willing to do the role player work and sacrifice his personal stats in an effort to try and push the team to the next level and get some wins. Obviously, that didn't happen that way for the team in
Hmm.
terms of getting championships, but that's 2 years ago. Then last year we saw the kid who was dropping a 1.4 in challengers drop 1.4 KDs on an LA Thieves team that at the beginning of the year wasn't really that good, and then definitely got a lot better towards the end of the year. But he was able to be that star player. So we saw him be a role player, saw him be the star player. And this year he is on a team with he's on a team with 3 world champions, 2 all-star caliber players in a league that only has 8 all-stars, and 2 annual MVP candidate players. So what do you want the guy to do? We talk about it with all these roster changes. There are a finite number of kills on the map. And if Scrap's going 30 and 15, Hydra's going 30 and 20, and Envoy's going, let's just even say 25 and 25, like there are only so many kills that Ghosty can get. So this is just a situation where you might have to look a little deeper if you're an LA Thieves fan and be like, oh, maybe Ghosty is going negatives in these maps, but if we're winning by 150, who cares that he's going negative, really? I kind of got a little bit more passionate there about it, and I thought I was gonna, but whatever I saw in the YouTube chat definitely stuck with me and just made me think of, I feel like that was a trip down memory lane for maybe some Ego Chall listeners who haven't been here for the entire Ghosty saga and the CDL. And just a reminder that, we've seen what Ghosty's capable of. If he had to be the guy on this team, like, Scrap, Hydra, and Envoy all get into a bar fight the night before the grand finals, and they got stitches in their hand. Shout out Aches. Like, Ghosty can step up and be that guy if he has to. He just hasn't really had to for this team yet, and I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, there's not been an extended period in Ghosty's pro career where you should doubt him. Like match. Sure, like he might have an off match, he might have bad maps or whatever, but like there's not been an extended period in the 3 years that he's been in the CDL that would rightfully make you think, okay, maybe he isn't the right guy. He has been valuable on Optic. He's been valuable on 2 very different LAT teams. They were rebuilding last year. This is a championship contender. He's been invaluable in some ways to both of those teams. And I was just looking up his stats. Since Major 1, he has a 1.06 overall KD. He has a 1.19 search KD, which is second best on the team behind Hydra, who is dropping a 1.36 in search. So yeah, this is just an overall great team. Like, I know there were doubts about Envoy in particular, but he has been more than ready to step up and be a really valuable part of this team. And they're 17-3 in their matches since the Major 1 Grand Finals. So they've won all but 3 of their matches in the last 3 months. Like, let's slow, pump the brakes. Of course, they had that disappointing Major 2, but like you said, if there's a gun to your head, you're probably picking LAT, and there's no wrong answer in that. It's not like, how dare you do that? LAT was very close to beating FaZe, which would have got them a Major 1, and they have a bad Major 2, but they've been very consistent. And this is kind of the argument that I've always made with FaZe, is that FaZe has always been really consistent. Like, they might not always win, but I can rely that they're going to be there more times than not. And that can't be said for a lot of teams. But LAT is probably one of those teams at this point in time. So yeah, this is a really great team, and we'll see if they can break the curse of the number 1 seed this season. I couldn't. I would be at a loss for words if that.
Hey, you called me a jinx, so I'm kind of I'm in a bad position right now if Carolina actually does it.
Another stat, or 2 more stats that I think are pretty interesting. So this was before, obviously, today's series between Optic Texas and Atlanta FaZe, but at Money Hill Stats on Twitter tweeted that. But this is before the match, of course. Hook has never lost to Atlanta FaZe when he has played for Optic Texas. He is 5-0 against them under the green wall. Obviously, things have changed. He is now 5-1 with Optic against Atlanta FaZe. And Atlanta FaZe, the actual Twitter account, tweeted a graphic of Draza as like a puppeteer with the strings on his fingers, controlling the Optic Texas roster. He is Draza is now 9-1 against Optic Texas in his career. Between LAT and Atlanta FaZe, right? Or just with Atlanta?
We had this conversation last time. I think that number is only for his time with FaZe, but I could be wrong.
That just seems like a lot of matches against FaZe or against Optic, though. That's the only thing.
But they were really good against Optic last year, and the year before FaZe weren't. But Draza was, I don't remember. I just remember that we had this conversation before, and we weren't. I don't remember what conclusion we came to about how the breakdown was. Regardless, Draza has been pretty good against Optic in his career, whether it's overall or lately.
Yeah, I was just trying to look it up real quick. I don't think I'm gonna be able to look it up without just a bunch of dead air. But either way, like it's pretty great considering they were having a lot of trouble, and then Draza arrives and they no longer have as much trouble against Optic, which is pretty interesting nonetheless. I'm going to quickly run through the standings. Do you want to run through the matches real quick, and then I'll go through the standings and just list out the bracket?
Yep, just make sure we hit everything.
Yep.
So first match on Friday, you already talked about it. Toronto beat Miami 3-1. Boston beat Cloud9 3-0. That was one of the matches we didn't talk about specifically, but obviously Boston had a good weekend, so shouldn't be surprising in that sense. Purge played pretty well in that series overall. Then LAT versus LAG, the battle for LA, where LAT 3-0. The map one was a 250 to 193 in the hardpoint, definitely probably closer than a lot of people are expecting, but after that, LAT dominated. First match on Saturday, April 19th was Vancouver versus C9. Vancouver won 3-2. Cloud9 made a almost 100-point comeback in map 1 to win 250 to 231 behind Sib, dropping 39 kills. Sib was just frying in the series overall, went 13-7 for the loss in a 6-5 search map 2, and then 33-26 in the map 4 hardpoint loss. And Vancouver closed it out with a 6-1 win in game 5. So that was a pretty hype series overall for a 5-game showdown there. Miami versus Minnesota after that. Miami won 3-1, one of the rare series so far for the new Minnesota team with Kenny, where it didn't go to a game 5. And the one map Minnesota won in that was a 3-0 in the control, so Miami won the 2 hard points in the search. Toronto versus LAG was a 3-1, where LAG won the first map of the series 250 to 64, and my immediate reaction was, oh no, Toronto must be having server issues or online issues again. After that, I mean, the series was pretty close. It was a 6-5 in the map 2 search, where LAG made a 1-5 comeback to force a round 11, and Toronto just won the round 11. A 3-2 in control, and then a 92-point win in the game 4 hardpoint, where Thieves went 44-26. So Toronto beat LAG 3-1 there. Then Atlanta beat Vegas 3-1 to end Saturday. I already talked about that one. And today, Sunday 420, Boston beat Vegas 3-2. We kind of talked about this just in the sense of Vegas got reverse swept, which was unfortunate, and it came down to a game 5 round 11. So this was a pretty hype series overall as well. Atlanta versus Optic 3-1 for Atlanta. Talked about that in LAT 3-0. DoorDash challenged Carolina to round out the qualifiers today.
And the standings as they are to finish the Major 3 qualifiers. Like I said earlier, a 5-way tie for first place. But the C's go LAT 1, Boston 2, Vancouver 3, Miami 4, and Toronto 5. Atlanta FaZe gets 6th, and Optic Texas gets 7th as a result of a tiebreaker with the Carolina Royal Ravens, who finish 8th. They get the last winner's bracket spot. The 4 teams starting in the loser's bracket to start Major 3. 9th place, Minnesota. Vegas gets 10th, and C9 gets 11th. Those 3 teams were tied at 1 and 4. So there was another tiebreaker. I think that was 3 different tiebreakers in these 12 teams. And then at 0 and 5, at the very bottom of the pack, the Los Angeles Guerrillas mate. They went 3 and 15 in these qualifiers, so not great. So yeah, the bracket, as you could imagine, is LAT versus Carolina, Miami versus Toronto, Boston versus Optic, and Vancouver and Atlanta. That is the winners bracket. And again, Minnesota, LAG, Vegas, and C9 are in the losers bracket. So the loser of Carolina and LAT play Minnesota. The loser of Miami, Toronto play LAG. Loser of Boston Optic play Vegas, and the loser of Vancouver and FaZe play C9. I'd be so pissed. So C9 gets the short end of the stick for sure on that one. But yeah, that is Major 3. That will be in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. It'll be hosted by the Miami Heretics. Fortunately, they do start in the winners bracket again, so it's not an optic situation. At least they'll get 2 matches at the very least out of it. But yeah, that about does it for this show. Pick'em, I should say real quick, because I need to mention this. I went 10-0 in the Pick'em this week, and you did pretty well too, 7-3. But there were only 3 matches difference between the two of us heading into this week. So going into Major 3, we are tied at 112-60. So yeah, it should be a very fun tournament to talk about. We will talk about the Major 3 bracket in depth. I know we're kind of talking about it, but we will talk about it more. We'll talk about some of the predictions that we have for those matches, and everything that relates to Major 3. We will talk about that on Wednesday, April 23rd. So tune in live on YouTube and Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can search up Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube if you want to listen and watch live. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and of course, YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/JBink with 2Ks. And again, next show will be on Wednesday, April 23rd. The podcast will be in your feeds Thursday, April 24th, the morning of. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys, as always, for all the support and for tuning in. Definitely got a little ahead of myself with some of the, Major 3 talk this episode. But like I said, once I saw that bracket and I saw all 4 matchups that we know for sure right now, I got really excited. I think, again, not to jump the gun, but the outside of Thieves versus Carolina is interesting in the sense of, are we going to see another stomp? But outside of that, the other 3 matches have the potential to realistically go Game 5, Round 11 if the teams are playing up to par with what we've seen this year and how those matchups have gone previously. So, yeah, I'm really excited for this major coming up. Also, just worth mentioning, we've kind of been teeing it up over the past couple of weeks, but really there is no break after this upcoming week. We're going right back into the qualifiers, and we're at the point now there are only 3 weeks of online Call of Duty left in the 2025 CDL season. We got the major this next week. Then after that, 3 weeks of online qualifiers before Major 4, and then the online portion of the season's over. So, for the loyal COD Esports fans who love their LAN action, it's coming, and it's coming up quick. So, I'm excited for Major 3 this week. I'm excited to go even more in depth than we already did this episode on the bracket and everything about that in our preview show in a couple days. So hopefully you guys will tune in for that. But yeah, other than that, we'll see you when we go live again. And remember to send the chat.